Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our employee engagement webinar, How to Engage Your Staff Through Surveys. We've had a huge interest in today's webinar with over 150 individuals signing up. So no pressure to our guest, Mairi, who I'll be introducing in just a few moments. We will give it a few minutes just to let everyone log on and join the webinar. As I know from our new world of work, we will have a split of those working from home, jumping from one Zoom or Teams call to another and scrambling around, and those now back in the office fighting to find a free desk or a room to be able to join the webinar that's in place. So as people are joining, if you would like to click on the chat box at the bottom that you'll see and open that up and maybe just say hello to us and introduce yourself. You can't see each other's messages unless it's in the group, but just literally say hello and I'll call some of them out and welcome you as we go. Like I say, we'll make a start at probably 5 past, so it'd be great to say hello to a few people who are joining and coming in. And the numbers are continuing to ramp up, which is very exciting. So as people are joining, like we're saying, welcome to our employee engagement webinar, How to Engage Your Staff Through Surveys. Very, very excited for the next 45, 50 minutes. A huge audience have signed up. Welcome to Justin from On It Logistics. Lovely to have you here. Welcome to Clark. We're recording on the webinar, so really excited to have you all coming in. If anybody's just joined us, please drop a little note into the chat box to say hello and introduce yourselves, because we can't see from this side, so it'd be lovely so everyone knows who's on the call at different points. Just a couple more minutes as everybody joins in, just to make sure people have a chance to get a cup of tea, to log out of their last Zoom meeting and into the next webinar on a lovely Friday afternoon. And what a topic to be talking about, how to engage your staff through surveys, all for a Friday afternoon, ready to digest and put into practice on Monday. Mairi, we need some hold music, don't we? I keep saying this. We need to get some sort of theme tune in the background. We'll have to get Doug onto that next time to have that in place, just to support as we build through.
Get some tension building music.
That's it, yeah. On our last webinar, I did put that out there to say, what theme tune would you come out to? We had some wonderful examples. Some of them I've never heard of before, but they were brilliant when I listened to them afterwards. Great, we'll make a start. This webinar is being recorded as well. So for those that are on attendance, we'll be sending this afterwards, and any others that aren't, we'll be making sure that we follow that through as well to follow up. So let's begin, shall we? For those of you that I've not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Mike Brennan, co-founder and CEO of Stribe. I hope you enjoy the next 40 to 50 minutes, and we want you to be as involved as you possibly can be in today's section. So you will see on the bottom, there's a Q&A box on your Zoom screen, hopefully. If you could just click on that and open it. I have lots of questions to ask our guests I'll be introducing in just a second, but we want you, our audience, to ask as many questions as possible. So please do note your questions down and pop them into the Q&A box. As they come through, I'll do my best to answer them. And these sessions work the best through that real-time engagement and getting your thoughts and any challenges that you're facing that I'm sure Mairi will be able to support and answer with in the journey. There is one cool feature that I love in the Q&A box, which is called upvote. So when a question comes in that you were thinking of asking, as lots of questions come through, if you click on that upvote button, it will increase its chance of going to the top of my screen. The faster you upvote it and the more you upvote it, the quicker it gets answered. It's as simple as that. So how to engage your staff through surveys, what a topic. I am sure we've all been sending out lots of questions and surveys to our teams and people over the last few months. But the question is, are we doing anything with this data to engage our staff in order to deliver real change that matters within our organization? Employee engagement is super important for both employees and employers. In recent studies, 74% of engaged employees felt a positive influence on their health, and businesses with a higher number of engaged employees enjoyed a 21% increase in profitability. However, with teams now scattered across the country, keeping them focused, engaged, and happy at work is a challenge many people have. The first step in finding out how your employees are feeling and what you can do to improve engagement is to run a survey or to ask questions of your people. It's really powerful to know what your employees think, because you can identify areas of improvement, address any development issues, and keep your employees engaged using the information you're given. So in this webinar, we hope to cover a couple of topics, including the importance of employee engagement, practical advice on how to capture employee feedback, discuss what your employees might tell you and how to use the data when delivering a survey, how to use employee feedback to engage your teams, and finally, we'll be sharing advice to those who are just starting out with their employee surveys for the first time. Whether you're at the start of your engagement journey or looking for advice on how to best create a culture of engagement and support, this webinar will be packed full of useful insights you can take away. And so it's now time to introduce to us our incredible guest today. We're joined by engagement expert Mairi Probin, the Chief Culture and People Officer at Mapped Group. From her time at Iceland Foods, which won the Sunday Times Best Big Company to Work For in the UK, to her continual success at the Mapped Group, we're excited to listen to Mairi's expertise, top tips, and recommendations so that you can learn more about using surveys to create a fantastic workplace culture. So without further ado, Mairi, welcome to our webinar, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, pleased to be joining you from sunny Manchester.
Well, it's lovely to have you, and we're really looking forward to firing some questions at you and hearing about what you think is important from an engagement point of view and delivering the best surveys. So it would be great, I think, for our audience if you could give us a little bit of background on your journey. So how you found yourself as a Chief People Officer in MAP, what's been the journey to date would be great.
Yes, well, I won't take up the hour. So historically, actually, I started my career in marketing, which actually there's loads of stuff that comes from a marketing background that you can bring into kind of the employee engagement space, particularly because a lot of it is kind of internal marketing. So I started at Iceland Foods as a marketeer, and then did all various things. I kind of went around the business and did lots of different jobs. And then at one point I went into the HR team to set up an employee engagement and internal comms function, and loved it. And part of our metrics there, because, you know, in a nutshell, people don't necessarily grow up wanting to work for Iceland Foods. If you want to work in retail, you might want to work in John Lewis or Selfridges or something like that. So it was, how do we get people to think about Iceland in the first instance? And then it was over to the recruitment team. So the best companies to work for was part of that strategy of how to get people to consider Iceland in the first place. So we did loads in that. And it was interesting because then my exec director, who kind of put me in all the different business parts of the business, came back to say, I want you to go and do something else. And I was like, I don't want to do something else. I love this. Yeah. So, you know, we were like, is yes, is no an answer? So I stayed where I was. I did that for a few more years, absolutely loved it. And then I left to work for myself in the engagement space. So I worked with all kinds of businesses. So from FMCG, I've worked with Warburtons, through to some manufacturing environments, through to academia and law, which is where I started working with the Jackson Lees Group, which is one of the businesses within the Mapped Group. So then, having done that for a number of years, I then joined, as the Mapped Group was kind of established fully by Brian and Joanna, I then left my self-employed life behind and became an employee again. And so joined the Mapped Group as Chief People and Culture Officer. So, and I always say I've come back into the world of employment as a much better employee than I think I left.
I'm absolutely sure you have. Brilliant, Mairi, thank you so much. And before I suppose we get into the questions of the particular topic, something that's on everybody's mind, in that role that you've been in, how have you found the last 12 months? You know, the dreaded word of COVID, everyone's getting bored of it, but generally, how have you found that operationally for yourself and your teams?
Really, 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 really tough. Yeah. Like lots of people, I think they're, you know, with working in the people space, you know, where perhaps in, you know, some parts of work or business, you can turn the tap off of the work coming in, or you can actually go, do you know what, we're going to do less of this and pivot more and do a bit more of that. In the people space, you know, we had to look after our people through the most difficult of times, you know, so whether that was all the support that was needed around mental health, you know, all the stresses that came with that, people suffering loss, bereavement, all that came with that, people being ill themselves, people being worried, through to furlough. How do you get your head around furlough? What does that mean? How do we, you know, at one point in the Jackson Lees Group, I think we had 95 people on furlough, which was nearly a third of the business. How do we still engage with those people? So how do we keep talking to them? How do we, you know, survey them? How do we have catch-up sessions with them when they're not part of the business? And then also, how do you look after the people who are left in the business? And then how do you integrate all of those people back in? So really, really, really tough times. fortunately, that my people team are absolutely brilliant, but they themselves, are struggling through some of those times, whether it's just the volume of work or whether it's in their own lives or what have you. So yeah, no different from anyone else really. But I think particularly in the people space, I often excuse the language, but generally shit flows downhill, and I say that the people team were at the bottom of the bucket going,
I was just about to say that, to say thank you so much for your honesty there, because I think, as any size of organization, as soon as the sort of chief people function or HR team or people team, however that sits in your organization, we're also humans. You're also humans, and you're trying to work out to do the best for everybody, and therefore being able to say, and I think that's a really important point for everyone to remember, is both from the employee point of view and the employer, is getting that relationship right and being really, really clear in what you are or are not going to do is probably half the battle.
Yeah, that's it. And everybody is human, trying to do their best in the set of circumstances we find ourselves in. I think sometimes there can be that default to, why are they making those decisions, about that kind of very much people removing themselves from the management, and they are telling us we have to do this. And in reality, they are us. We are all in it together, and we are all just, as I say, doing the best with the information we have in the circumstances that we're all in. So, and I think having those conversations on an ongoing basis, it's been a big part of that, really.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to getting into the question section and focusing on the topic of how to engage our teams through surveys with the extra communication and what to do with that. For everybody that's on the call, please do pop in your question answers. We want this to be as interactive as possible throughout this webinar journey. So click on that box at the bottom and add as many questions as you want to as we go through. But just to introduce to the audience how we know one another. So I met Mairi and a colleague, Gemma Ellison, from the people team over 9 months ago. And Mairi and Gemma were looking to collect more regular insights from their staff in order to support engagement, culture, and experience for their colleagues, as Mairi just mentioned. And Mairi and Gemma chose Strive as their staff engagement partner. And over the last 9 months, we've really worked closely to use Strive to deliver both pulse questions and surveys to their staff. So this is where our relationship comes together for this webinar. At Strive, we help teams to be heard, taking their small insights day by day, leading to real change that matters, because we know that when people are heard, teams are happy. And for those of you who haven't heard of Strive before, Strive is an employee engagement platform which enables organizations to deliver real-time surveys and pulse questions to their staff in a really simple and engaging way. It helps organizations to collect both quantitative and qualitative insights in real time, and helps organizations to deliver that real change that matters both for employees and the organization. So for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to learn about Mairi's employee engagement journey and how she engages her staff through surveys. So Mairi, my first question to you is quite a big one, but what does employee engagement mean to you?
I think this is always a really difficult one, isn't it? And I think where, and for those people on the session who are in businesses where you need to try and persuade people that it's relevant and right to invest in stuff, it is hard because there isn't one definition. It's really hard to, whether it's people need to prove it, so that's a challenge, definitely. For me, when I think about engagement, I think less about what it is and more about what it's about. So for me, it's all about how do you feel and interact with your employer and your work and your team. So it's how do you feel and interact? So how do you feel about it, and how does that then translate into action? Because there's all kinds of stuff goes around. Is it satisfaction? Is it engagement? What is it? But for me, that's what it's about, and therefore all the things that we do should link to that. And that's where for me there's a thing about to a certain extent businesses can decide their own definition of employee engagement. So for us in the mapped group, our definition of employee engagement is around do people feel able to bring themselves to work, be exactly who they are in the workplace? Do they feel able? Do they feel that they are developed in their self and their career? Do they feel that there is open and honest communication between them and the business? Do they feel they're well led, and do they feel they make a positive difference? So for us in the mapped group, that is what employee engagement is. How do you feel about that, and how do you interact with that on an ongoing basis? So it's probably not, it's not really an answer, but that's kind of how I approach it.
I think it's a very good answer, because you made the point of it is difficult to give that single definition. And speaking with many organizations over the last 12 months, some of the things that we found organizations to struggle with is kind of what is the umbrella term? So obviously well-being has been a key part of that journey, but actually if you're looking at engagement overall, well-being feeds into that strategy. So I completely agree with what you're saying. It's that overall element of all the boxes that you're trying to put towards your people.
That's it, and everything that drops into it. So when I used to work for myself and I go meet all different businesses, people had sometimes say things like, well, we're not really focusing on performance management at the moment because we're thinking about engagement. So I say to them, but it is all about, that is a fundamental part of engagement, is how you manage and motivate and reward and recognise, or kind of get people to pull the socks up. If you've got two people doing the same job and one is absolutely firing on all cylinders and the other one comes in at 9:15 every day, that has an impact on engagement, doesn't it? So I think it's such a broad thing with so many building blocks that you kind of, I think you have to be relatively all right at all the building blocks, but not brilliant at them all, because also there's the link about what's important in your business. So if you're a business that's much more kind of target driven, for example, how you reward and recognise that will be quite different from, maybe a not-for-profit or what have you. So actually they can dial down that part of what they do but actually their kind of CSR approach will have to be much stronger than a very target driven organisation, where they might be kind of like, as long as I hit my targets and take home what I think is owed to me, then I'm very engaged with my business. So
absolutely. I know when we first spoke right at the start, we shared huge views. Where we were trying to go as a technology organisation was almost to make surveys and engagement part of that KPI pack for the organisation. So you as the chief people officer can deliver those metrics in the same way that your chief financial officer is saying whether the business is good or bad. It's whether the organisation is feeling great or not. And with that comes that umbrella.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And I think that's where, within the survey space, I'm always, in terms of what do you need to think about when we're thinking about surveying and how can that help an organisation? In the first instance, for me, it's having to think about, and everybody being clear about, why are you doing it in the first instance? Why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you think you should? Well, I'm not sure that's a good enough reason, it's a start, but actually, why are you doing it? And are you open to being able and up for listening to what is being said and to challenging yourself with what you hear? So actually, why you're doing it in the first place will link through all the way through right to the very end, because what do you do with the data? Well, that's partly to do with why do you want to do it in the first place. It might be you're finding a benchmark, it might be who knows what it is, but in terms of having people in the organisation clear on why you're doing it in the first instance, for me, is really important, and that articulation. So I think for me, a lot of it is about why do you do engagement surveys as part of your broader suite. There's a big bit, isn't there, around that, the noise. I'm sure loads of people on this call will be able to name who these people are in their business. All businesses have that noisy minority that are very happy to tell you what they think. And I think going forward, actually, it's going to be really more important than ever, because it's not only who can you hear, but who can you see? So that noisy minority, if people are working in a hybrid way and coming and going at different times, actually there might be some people that don't see very much. So actually, how do you make sure that you're not getting distracted? Maybe your noisy minority is representative. Maybe they are.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe.
So, as I say, I'm not sure lots of people have lots of names going through their mind at the moment. So it's how do you give the silent minority a voice to sense check the silent majority, and sense check the noisy minority. So there's a big bit of that in terms of the why for me as to why it's important and why it can be really helpful, and then flow through into your metrics.
So Mairi, in every organisation you've gone into and working with and supporting, engagement is that kind of umbrella, as we know. How do we then put the survey on the table? How do you bring that to the leadership team? How do you get your team motivated around, we're going to do this? What are the steps that you take to make sure that's going to happen?
I think it's that having that open conversation about why do you want to do it in the first place and what do you want to know, and that piece around, if you don't know what you're dealing with, how do you know what you're solving? People can have instincts or intuition about, this is the big problem in the business. Yeah. I know what the big problem is because Dave in finance tells me every time I see him. It's like, well, that might be Dave in finance's big problem, but actually the rest of the business are worried about something else that they're not articulating to you. So that was always the thing about, actually, if what you want to do is make a change, which everybody, we should always want to make a change, because we should always want to get better. If what you want to do is make a change, how do you know what you're changing, and how do you know where to focus your efforts, and how will you know whether when you've found that and you focused your efforts, you've actually had an impact and you've made a difference? So it's that, I think it's funny, isn't it? People often approach, if you were talking about what will you do with a marketing campaign, you'd approach it in that way. But when it comes to people, sometimes people just lose that sense of logic sometimes, of that kind of, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. They're just so difficult, aren't they?
Yeah.
Not really.
So let's delve into that. It's quite interesting because I think it's me, included myself and my organization, 9 times out of 10, I will get the questions together that I think are the right things to put into a survey, then send it out and then probably try and work back off that. But I think it's quite clear to get it right. There's a bit more science, a bit more structure about relating that back to outcomes at the other end. So would you talk us through that kind of structure of then creating that for you to get that change?
Yeah, that's it. So there's a bit about why you're doing it and what do you want to know and what you're prepared to face into, because if you get a load of stuff back that you're not prepared to face into, you probably shouldn't ask it in the first place. So I think that's the first bit. I think also what a lot of people then go straight into is, well, what are the questions and let's ask them. There's a big bit for me in the positioning of the survey with people. You know, if part of this is about engaging people through surveys, the positioning of why we're doing it is a really important part. So, you know, instead of going out to people and saying, right, we need you to fill in a survey for us because we want to know this, is very different from saying it's really important we involve you in shaping the business going forward. So we want to hear you tell us what's important, you know, and that positioning piece is really important. I think that's where often you can have a big impact in terms of either whether people take part at all or whether when they take part they're honest, etc.
Yeah.
So that positioning piece is really important. And then I think if this is the first time you're going into it, probably, because as ever, you know, the surveys, and that's why I think Strive is interesting, that it gives you 2 elements, the quantitative and the qualitative, but it's, you know, that any survey is only one part of your toolbox. So starting with some, you know, whether it's focus groups or just discussion groups with people about what's important, and then that flows through into your question sets, because it's, you know, if you need to measure what's important, you need to ask the right things, but also the things you need to ask need to not feel so disconnected from the business that people think you've got no idea what's going on here. So that kind of positioning it with people, positioning it that you're interested and that they are playing an active role, but then moving through into the question set of what kind of things do we want to know, are we in touch with the business, all of that kind of stuff. It's about, you know, asking the right questions and asking the questions in the right way as well, and in terminology.
How do you sense check that as an organization? We're going to get into the details from surveys in a minute, but how do you make sure that you're asking the right questions at the right time?
Well, I don't want to tell you I've necessarily always got that right. I don't know, we do. So, but there's a big part of, you know, so for example, in the mapped group, you know, what is a mapped business? It is about the ability to be yourself and express yourself in work and be truly yourself. It is about, do you feel that you're developed as an individual and in your career? Do you feel that our communication is open and honest? So all of those things that we are striving for when we talk to people about, we ask the question. So for example, and so MAPT stands for making a positive difference. So we have one core value across the group, and that is, I believe we make a positive difference. So one of our key questions, our KPI questions is, I believe we make a positive difference. So in the last survey, we got 88% on that from our people, saying 88% of our people feel that they make a positive difference on a day-to-day basis. So there's it, whether we always get it right, I'm not sure, but kind of some of our core questions we build around what are the things that we say are important to us, and we talk to our people about what we want to give to them. So, you know, we ask around, you know, is this a place where you can develop your career? For example, do you understand the training and development opportunities that are available? So that's where those questions are important. That's where the benchmark is really helpful, actually, for us in terms of where you guys give us that comparison, because, you know, so Gemma, who you mentioned before, who works in my team, is brilliant, and I call her Scrappy Doo because she just absolutely goes after everything. So when we got a score this time that was about 70% for around our learning development, she sees that as a failure, but actually the benchmark says actually it's about 50.
Yeah.
So that's good. You know, we want to be better because it's one of our, you know, key core things that we offer our people. But that's really helpful in terms of the positioning of it, which I think, you know, then for people on the call, going back into your business to position your score against the benchmark is a really helpful thing, because, you know, it might be part of going right back to the very beginning of why you're doing it. It might be in the first instance you just want to sense check, where are we? And then if you've got the benchmark, actually the where are we can you know, really feed through to that.
That's one of my next questions that feeds in quite nicely, because there's always a conversation around frequency, isn't there, of regards to the number of questions and the questions that you ask. There's also that frequency. It'd be great to get your views in terms of, as you just said there, if you're on the start of the journey, you're just getting a state of play and understanding versus a regular check on a specific topic. Do you run both across the map?
We do. Whether we've got it right yet, I don't know, to be honest. And I think in the way we've all been working over the last year or so, whether what it looks like going forward will be different from what, I don't know, because you've not had, whilst we've had a few people come into the office, everybody's been in their home offices, aren't they? So I think in my mind, as we kind of develop this and we come out of the way we're working at the moment, probably an annual kind of benchmark of where are we, but then kind of quarterly maybe, but then also periodically dropping down into a subject. Actually, we want to hear more about this. So for example, when last year, when everyone first went off, how do you feel about working at home? Do you feel you've got the kit that you need? All that. So every so often something comes up, doesn't it? Hopefully nothing ever as big as the pandemic, but things come up. So we'll have our schedule of what we want to know in a kind of global holistic basis, but then also there'll be times where we go, actually, do you know what, we want to dig into X because we want to do a bit of work on it and just make sure we're going in the right direction.
And I think that's a really important part for the audience, because we see this quite a lot from our side of going back to the why do you want to ask a question or questions, and are you prepared of what might come out for it? Because it's all about that 360-degree loop, isn't it? Whether you ask one question of how you're feeling or are you equipped for the pandemic?
Yeah.
If you're asking what technology or support is required and you can't deliver and support that, then there's going to be another challenge of de-engagement off the back of that. So really important to kind of have both lined up in that structure, isn't it? Of whether it's annual or quarterly or monthly, depending on that look.
Yeah, that's it. And I think something you said there was interesting in there, how you phrase the question. Something I've definitely learned over time is if you ask a question that's around, if it's kind of rate on a scale of 1 to 5, I feel comfortable in what's expected of me in my job. Yeah. People generally agree with that question because they think it's a sense check on whether they're good at their job or not. They read that as, are you good at your job? So everybody tells you they're good at their job. Whereas if you say, I believe my line manager has been clear with me about what's expected of me, you get a slightly different. So with all the time when people think about what their questions are, it's actually what the question says and what people read the question as are two different things. And if people read the question as a test of how good they are at their job or how clever they are at understanding messages, do you understand the strategy of the business? Some people are like, well, yeah, of course do. Might never have communicated it. And you're like, well, how do they? Because I've never told them. They read that as a do you understand? And therefore, well, yeah, I agree. So there's definitely a bit in the wording of the question and what people read that as. I think
that's a really, really important part. Some of the things that we find is some of the first questions that people ask us is, how many questions should I ask? And I think that's become a challenge over time, isn't it? Where the annual survey started off with the 5 right questions potentially a year or 2 years ago. And now everyone wants to know something about the business. And before you know it, you're completing 50 questions and some of them are very similar or misleading. So really important point about what questions are you asking and why, and getting that right. It's better to ask 5 really key questions than it is 50 questions.
And there's a big bit I think there that links into the communication as well, because I think telling people about why you're asking the questions. And then, so that links to, so in my old life when I was in Iceland and we did the best company to work for survey, that's like 50, 60 questions, something like that. And there's a bit in there where, they change the phraseology of the question to make sure people don't just tick, I agree, because sometimes strongly agree is the right answer and sometimes strongly disagree is the right answer, if you will, as in the engaged answer. And then they ask the same question a few different times in different ways, which, the challenge we found with that is people are like, well, they're just trying to catch me out. So we talk to people about actually not trying to catch you out. This is why they're doing it, to make sure that you're reading the question and actually that we're not making you answer it in a certain way. Or so there was quite an interesting piece of communication there about helping people understand they're not trying to catch you out, they're just validating the data and what does that mean, etc. So there's so much in the what do you ask, when do you ask, how do you ask it, and how do you position it. There's lots to think about, I think.
And we briefly touched on kind of the quantitative and the qualitative feedback as well. And I think as technology becomes more advanced and there's more options to do so, the qualitative feedback is just as, if not more valuable than the quantitative, because it's like you say, you get into that sentiment and the understanding of the human. And I know that's a really key point for you, isn't it? Making sure that you and the team do read the comments that come through as much as what they've responded.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that is, I'll be honest, I don't think we do that as well as we could at the moment. I think we need to find a better way of us processing what you give us. As I say, Gemma knows it all. And actually what that really helps us to do is when we're communicating the data or when we're, putting together a proposal as to why we should do something, using quotes is so much more powerful. You can say, well, this is what someone said, you know, so that's brilliant. I think there's more we need to do. I think for me, there's a big kind of thing with the quantitative stuff. The qualitative stuff gives you really great depth and really great insight. I think again, sometimes is the positioning piece. So a kind of a salutary lesson to me years ago, again, when I was at Iceland, as I went into a store, I remember it was a Bedford way, and clearly a lot was going badly in it. And one of the ladies said, I've told you this. I told you. I thought, what do you mean told me? She said, well, I put it on my best company survey. Like, well, we didn't get all that data and we didn't read it all. And actually I didn't, but she felt really, really harshly done to, because she believed that she told me, sitting in their office, even though there were 25,000 people, she told me that there was a problem. I hadn't done anything about it. So it's that, again, how do you position with people what it's for, how you use it, what that looks like, and actually what they should put in there. If what they put in there is a real cry for help, then cry for help somewhere else. You know, so there's just a little bit around that, but being able to match the quant and the qual is really, really useful, because it brings it to life, doesn't it? It brings it to life. That's the
it does. And I was just about to go back on that step, because the qualitative part is also the evidence of the trust and the communication and what they can say, rather than hiding behind a response type. And it's back to your point, you're saying that communication piece of why we're going to ask this survey and what we hope to achieve or do to support you is just as important as seeing what those answers are that come in. It's about getting that right and sharing that journey with your people, not sort of hiding behind the screen and seeing what comes back and then thinking it.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that links up to the being ready to listen to the data that comes out of it, or the comments that come out of it. If they're, you know, often we're as inclined to do this as anybody, because I think it's quite human nature. If, you know, so for argument's sake, you believe absolutely we've communicated our strategy to everybody, and then you ask the question, you know, has the business been clear about the strategy? And 50% of the people say no, we haven't. Instead of going back and saying, well, we have, because we did it in open forums and we sent an email out and we did this, instead of going out and telling people why they're wrong in what they've told you, you have to go, why is the perception that we haven't? And therefore, what can we do about it? And that can be quite a hard piece, can't it? Because, well, I've done all. What more do you want me to do? Well, something. I don't know, because whatever it is that we've done hasn't hit the spot. So that being open to kind of not using the data to tell people why their perception is wrong, but to help them understand what is the perception in the first instance, and therefore what do we do about it?
And that moves us nicely into the question around kind of the data elements and what does one look for in terms of the survey data, and that just opens up the conversation, because one shoe size does not fit all anymore, does it? As you said there, you can ask a question to everyone that you believe that's gone out, but your office staff have said they do because they're on email, but the staff that may be out on the road working remotely haven't been able to respond to the survey in certain ways. So what do you look for in terms of your survey data? What are the kind of key things you're trying to find from that?
So kind of at the headline level,
yep.
the full business of what are the key things that are important to us. So mapped development, able to express yourself, open, honest communication. So, you know, is our data telling us that we are there or thereabouts doing the things that we set out to do? Or are the things that we are doing hitting the spot with our people? Because you can do loads, can't you? But it's not hitting the spot, and therefore you need to go back to the drawing board and start again. So that's kind of at that kind of headline level, that's how we use that. Or we're not doing it, so therefore what else do we need to do? So that kind of navigating us. We then also look at it at a team level, because again, people on this call will have all different sizes of teams. So, you know, you can have, so again, I'll use an Iceland example of, if everybody in the whole of the Iceland store estate was having a brilliant time, but you're sitting in the store in Colchester and life is shit. Yeah. It don't matter that everybody else, in fact, it makes it worse that everyone else is having a good time, because you feel really left out. So actually breaking it down to the granular level. So in the Jackson Lees group, for example, actually, how do you feel in the wills team compared to how you feel in the residential property team versus into the operations team? You know, so my team, for example, all very loyal, my team, they always say they're very happy. So then how do you break it down? And I think depending on the size of the business and therefore the size of the sub teams, you always have to have that, you know, health check caveat that actually if you've got 10 people in a team, one person is 10%, so actually that can have a big skew, but you can use it as a guide to say, actually, is this team there or thereabouts in line with the business? Are they more engaged with the business? And therefore you can use that that line manager or head of department as a real positive example.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing that's working really well? That means your people, are really bought into the development opportunities, or really kind of trust your communication. Because actually then what we could do is go and ask you to talk to this person over here who's, it's not necessarily hitting the spot. Because generally my view is that, with all of this, line management is the kind of, it lives and dies on it, doesn't it? And generally line managers don't not do things because they can't be bothered. It's generally because they don't know how to. So actually, if you can help them know how to, you can put some interventions in place, and then the next time you do the survey, you can see whether that's had an intervention or not. So we do it at the overall global level, at team level, but then also, as you said, potentially chopping it down by different demographics, kind of loosely. So for example, we have in the Jackson Lees group, there are associates, which is kind of, if you're an associate in our business, it's kind of a platform to show what you can do. So it helps people lift themselves out of their departmental role into a more business-wide role. So it's a platform for them to get involved in stuff and be ready for that next career move. So we could look at our data by our associates. So actually, are there things that we're missing with our associates, or actually are they super engaged? Which kind of, you want your associates to be super engaged compared to everybody else. What does that look like? And so which that will then come with, and I have this conversation with people all the time about common issues. Common issues as when people start doing surveys, and one of them is around, the more you ask from a demographic perspective, the more, well, it's not anonymous, is it? It's not, you know who I am. Yeah. And again, in Iceland, you'd have it where you go into a store and you'd be like, well, I'm the only male home delivery driver that's 45 here. It's like, believe me, we've got 25,000 people. I'm not that interested in what you think.
I want to help the store and our group of collective, but one step at a time.
Exactly. Yeah, but everyone, even when Iceland was the best place to work in the country, everybody was so engaged. We still always got the pushback on anonymity. I think it's a human nature thing, isn't it? That's a challenge that you get. So it's just how you, again, answer those questions. Don't be too defensive. It's helping us understand more. The more we can slice and dice the data, the more useful it can be to us. So,
Mairi, I'd love to delve into that point in anonymity. I can say anonymity. How do you approach that with your employees currently and done previously? I think it's a really important point for the audience, because should it be anonymous, should it not? And if we know it's anonymous, how do we balance it and what do we say? I'd love to go into that point.
Yeah, and it is a really hard one, and we go around the houses on this, because particularly from a mapped group perspective, if our communication is open and honest, if what we strive is a totally open, honest, authentic, transparent relationship, then it just shouldn't matter whether we know who you are or not, because actually we want you to be honest. Yeah. But equally, I don't think we should ever kid ourselves that when in a business of 300 people, where the management, as much as you can kind of be around and have a great relationship with people, there's always just at some level, for some reason, that idea of, well, actually I want to just do this under I am an individual in a team as opposed to me as Mairi. Yes. So again, we have that conversation of, should that be what we're striving for? And I don't know the answer. I think it's a really interesting question, and I think probably there's size of business probably has a real impact for that one. But yeah, I don't know. It's a really difficult question. It's a really difficult one.
It is. And the reason I did that deliberately is because as a survey platform and engagement provider, it's something we really care about, and we want to help to increase those engagement rates and build that trust to make it easier for you guys to continue to do. And I think we make it very, very transparent that the platform itself is anonymous, but we still want to have that balance where people can be honest, be transparent, and say who they are if they so wish to. Because like you say, depending on the questions that you ask at the right time, if you're asking how people are feeling, you are naturally going to get those honest views where some people will feel amazing and tell you why. And there's some areas where people are not feeling great, and particularly in the pandemic, and need some help and support. And it's about still being able to help those areas, isn't it, without kind of removing the anonymity of people in that same way.
Yeah, that's it. Some people remove their own. So for example, in the last one, we've got a private family team in the Jackson Lees business, and Jenny's brilliant, and her team, I just absolutely love her. So in all the comments and that, it's like, oh yeah, Jenny's great, Jenny does this, Jenny's great. So it's like, well, I know who you are.
Yeah. I know where you where the teams come from.
Yeah. So some people kind of reveal themselves. Some people reveal themselves by what they say. But it's also that, it's about making sure also, sometimes when you read comments, you do know who that person is. You know who they are, absolutely, without a doubt. but you can't do something about it, because if you say it's anonymous, you say it's anonymous. So you have to hold your line and not kind of break that trust, even if if sometimes if it's something that's really, really, really a big deal, then either you break the anonymity or you find another way in. You use that as your platform to go and have a conversation with someone. But yeah, sometimes it's really easy to go, oh God, I know it was you that said this in the survey. But the minute you do that, it's gone. So you can't do it.
So obviously that's a key point, and leads into my another question is there any absolute don'ts when looking to engage your staff through surveys? As much as we all talk about what to do in the structure and go away and think about it, is there any quick wins to absolutely don't do this from my learnings?
The biggest thing I would say, and this is one of those things where everyone goes into it with the real expectation that they will, but it's actually a much harder thing to do, is if you don't do anything with it, don't do it. If I'm going to ask you how you feel about our training offering, and then everybody tells us it's not good enough, and you don't do anything with it, it's better not to have asked in the first place, because I've taken the time to tell you and you've done nothing. So for me, the biggest no, if you're not going to do anything with the data, don't do it in the first instance. And that's not to say that, because then sometimes people go, well, we can't do everything people want. It's like, you can say to people, this is what you've asked for, or this is what you've given us the feedback on. But you know what, at the moment, so pay I think is a really great example. Do you know what? Nobody's ever happy with pay. Actually, we were ahead of the benchmark, so we were happy about that. But no one, very, very few people are happy with what they're paid. So, but because people tell you that, it doesn't mean you either just do nothing with it or kind of whatever. You just have to say, you know what, these are really difficult times. They've been uncertain, they're still uncertain. So actually, this is what we're doing, for argument's sake. So I would say the big no is ask the question, do nothing with the answer. But getting the answer doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything. Yeah, that makes sense.
A big thread coming through here is communicating at every step. The survey is just a way to validate that moment in time, or things, whether they are feeling right or feeling not right. And it's ultimately being able to say, can we do something with this, and we really want to, or are we doing the right things, and making sure that you're commenting back whether you are doing something or you're not is just as important as asking those questions.
Yeah, that's it. And it might be, so we're in the process at the moment of communicating the results of our last survey, and one of the things I think we need to do is dig down into a little bit around some of the development opportunities. But what Gemma and I are really clear on is, until we've communicated the results, we don't want to go and ask more questions, because I've already told you, you're asking me more questions. So as part of our action plan is going to be, this is what you've told us about this, and we just want to find out a little bit more detail. So we might ask just one or two questions to dig down into it a little bit, because I think there's actually, if I'm, for argument's sake, a cost lawyer, in our academy, we don't deliver loads of sessions on being a cost lawyer, because we only have a few of them and it is an area of expertise. But actually, if they're kind of saying we want more development in that, it's how do you dig down into some of those different questions. But we're very clear, we won't start to ask those questions are part of our action plan on the back of the results, as opposed to a next step, if that kind of makes sense.
It does. And I think back to that point of, not one size shoe fits all now. And that's important to remember. If you're equally communicating back to areas that are really happy or really not, and you're saying the opposite message to one or the other, that can be really disengaging for someone, saying, well, I've given you a view of not feeling engaged or not feeling like I'm enjoying this journey, and you're saying, great, we all are. That's just not listening to people in that same way.
Yeah, that's it. And that's where, because I think response rates over the last however long have been lower, because people are in different places, and you've not got that chivvying around going, has everybody done it, etc. That kind of follow up. So where sometimes, and I've seen this in different places over the years, where we've said, so say for example the response rate is 60-odd%, you've got roughly 2/3, so it's probably robust enough. But actually, in positioning that data, it's not this is how you all feel, it's this is the data we have, does this reflect how you feel? Yes. Because as you say, that kind of assuming that the 2/3, and in reality probably your 2/3 includes both ends. So probably your third that's missing is your middle, whatever. Yeah, either or. But in terms of, depending on your response rate, depends on how you position it, because it's not necessarily this is how you feel, it's this is what the data's telling us, does this reflect? So when we talk to our line managers about sharing the data, that's kind of their starting point, is this is what the data's telling us, does this reflect your experience here? And then they have a conversation about it. And obviously, some people don't feel as comfortable saying that, because then you remove the anonymity. But as you go down into the more granular groups, that can be a way if your response rate isn't as high as you might want it to be.
Absolutely. And you had a really good point there. And you've mentioned line managers twice in this journey so far, but there's lots of different ways in which you can engage your people via surveys. Yes, that's directly telling individuals that responded and your people on the ground what's happening in the next steps, but equally empowering your line managers to, whether they like it or not, know the views of their teams or their areas is sometimes just important, because we've seen lots of line managers that just felt like something was all okay, or like you say, they were communicating what was told to them, but maybe only doing that on an email after sending 300 others about work related, not taking the time to pull the team together and be really, really clear. So just having that evidence and saying, here's the area, here's the team. It's not me as Mairi coming to you saying you're doing a good or a bad job. It's just, this is what the overall people are thinking can really empower.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. And with so in the Jackson Leeds group and as part of the mapped group more broadly, when we talk to kind of line managers, really, we ask them to think about kind of 4 key things. One is a day-to-day management, so that's around kind of clear plan, etc. So again, you think you've got a clear plan, but do your people think you've got a clear plan? Don't know. About empowering people, so about access to training and learning and development, you might think that you support them to do it, but if they're telling you they're not. A bit about role modeling, and then also legacy. So legacy is around that, we're all only babysitting our teams, aren't we, in terms of that period of time. So actually, are you empowering people to understand what opportunities there are for them to potentially step into your shoes or whatever? So we tell our line managers what we expect of them, and the survey data helps them understand, are their people feeling the different actions that they're taking. So
yeah, I think what we found, particularly with Stripe, helping organizations to ask more regular questions and get that insights in more real time than that of the annual survey and then going and exporting the data and seeing, is the ability to get that more honest feedback, and also just to have the quick data points. So if the board, if leadership are trying to make a decision around it, actually asking your people can really take some pressure and some weight off the top level, because you can then say, well, here's what people's views are. Now what we do with that is up to us to make the yes or no calls.
Yeah, that's it. This is kind of the direction that we think we're going in. Does that feel right? And as they going forward, I think more so than ever with hybrid working, being able to make sure everybody's had a say on that, as opposed to just the people who are more inclined to come into the office more often, is going to be interesting. And I think it's going to be kind of another way of using the surveys to just make sure we're getting representative views on some of the really key things.
Absolutely. So what would, for the audience, obviously they're probably thinking about their next survey at some point in time. What, for you personally, what's your next steps in terms of the survey? You mentioned you're going to share the data back and ask some questions. What do you think those questions will be about, and how are you going to deliver that in the coming months?
So kind of our key things coming out of our results this time were around our learning, development and progression scores were good, but actually not where if it's one of our really important things, we need them to be better. So really going back again and making sure we give some clarity around. So we have an academy, and I'm not sure we always link what the courses you're going on. I'm not sure we always link the course you're going on with the career track you're on. So this is the course. Why does that help you? Is it about developing a new job as a future leader, or is it whatever? So we need to do a bit more on that. Benefits, we want to look at that a little bit more. So we've just improved our maternity and paternity policy. So kind of getting that up and running, etc. And then just digging down a little bit more into some of the areas. So for example, learning development will be one of them. So there's some of the big things around the outcome of the survey we've just had. So we're sharing the results, and then what came through less in the quantitative data but more in the qual was what am I part of? That idea we've all been in 300 living rooms, in little bubble. What am I part of? So that we're putting a really big focus this year on actually communicating what is the strategy. So because last year we had a strategy, but kind of like everybody, it was kind of keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open, keeping everyone in jobs and keeping everyone paid. In reality, we didn't communicate that as well as we should have done, because I think we kind of almost, everyone was just so head down making it happen, weren't they? So this year it's much more right. So that was last year, and we all did it. Well done, because we're all still here and we're all in jobs and we've all been paid. Good. So then this year we're moving into, it's about kind of it's about stability, it's about modernisation, it's about growth. So, but because that came through quite strongly in the comments and the qual, it's right, actually we just need to really make sure that we communicate this strategy and keep weaving it through everything. And when we're communicating the strategy, we're going to be bringing the survey results into it. So when we're talking about stability, well, what are we? What makes us us? that idea of 88% of people feel we make a positive difference. That's who we are. So that's that kind of piece. And when we're talking about the modernisation, we're talking about, we're bringing some of the different elements. When we talk about growth, it's a bit about, when we talk about growth, it's not just getting bigger, it's getting stronger. And getting stronger is a lot about the learning and development. So bringing in those results from the survey, so really linking the two, that this is the strategy, you've talked to us about it, and then this is how the results have shaped it. That makes sense.
It does make complete sense, and I hope for the audience that's hearing that having a structure in place from what I'm getting through from start to finish, that wider strategy, and then plugging the questions in is the way to go, as opposed to ask the questions and try and put the strategy around that, which can easily happen. I think that's really, really clear and key. For anybody that's just starting their journey, Mairi, or has moved into the new role from marketing into people leads, and they're thinking of doing a survey, what would your starting top tips be if you could summarize them together?
I'd say there's two pieces. One is the why you're doing it, so having conversations across the business, and you need buy-in at a senior level, because if you don't have buy-in at a senior level, then in reality you're not going to be able to take the actions that you want to take, and therefore people aren't going to buy into it. So that senior level, again, it was funny, and when I used to work in Iceland, and you go to all these different events, and people would be like, oh, well, how do you get people, bought into the results? It's like, bloody hell, my problem is totally the opposite. I have area managers on the phone going, when are our results coming out? When are our results? It's like, all right, leave me alone, they're coming out, they'll get you. So it was really funny. Totally, the whole business was bought into the results. It was a really big, we used to do it twice a year, and it was a big deal. So that getting senior people bought in, in the kind of, I don't like the expression, but what gets measured gets done. Yeah. He's right in that respect. So getting it on the radar of senior people, but also this is not to everybody listening, this is not set up by you, but getting your partner right is really important. So when I think back to when I first moved into engagement, I didn't know what it was. So when I moved into the role, it was because I'd done an innovation job and had talked a lot about the things I thought we could do differently for our people. I didn't know what the term employee engagement was at that point. And so I worked back then, doesn't exist anymore, but ORC International. So I worked with them, it's like 2010 probably. And there was a lady there, Sally, who spent loads of time with me, really helping me understand what is it, how do we do it, why does it work, how do you approach it, all that kind of stuff. So that, that grounding I got from Sally at that point in time was absolutely brilliant. So for me, finding a partner that you can work with and that you can have conversations with. So like exactly the conversations we've had this week about, actually, do you know what, it would really help us if we could change the subject line and you guys go away and do it, is a big deal. So I'd say, getting senior buy-in and having the right partner are kind of two key starting points. Brilliant, thank you. And for me on this journey as well, it's also being able to listen. As much as you want to listen from your people as a provider, we need to listen to you, because you guys and other partners are the ones that are delivering this and need the data quickly, need the insights moving, and need to be able to do some of these things like communicating back with your staff, like sharing results and data. So it is a partnership approach that we like to go on, and lots of other partners are out there, and it's making sure your partner's listening to you on that journey too. Yeah, that's good. Sometimes it's even just a little thing. So like, for example, when we met Lucy a few weeks ago, we and again, there'll be different businesses out there. In a law firm, in a regulated environment, you need really, the cyber. Sorry, that was a call that just came through. Looks all gone. You're back in. Because we're a regulated environment, we have to be really secure, really strict, etc. So actually, some of the challenges that we had because we were inside a Citrix environment didn't match up with yours. So being able to have the conversation with Lucy that said, you know what, this is the problem we're having. It's nothing to do with your functionality or what we've set up or anything. It's just actually these two things aren't talking. So how do we solve that? So yeah, just like that, as you say, internally with your people, it's the conversations about how do we just fix it or tweak it or whatever. Yeah, brilliant. Well, Mairi, thank you so much. If I can summarize our conversation for the audience, and thank you to everybody that's joined today. I hope the practical honesty that Mairi's brought to the table here, just to sort of have a structure in place, make sure that your strategy is there, and looking at kind of the size of your organization and the structure of the organization to start to break that into, what are we doing at the high level view? How can that influence the middle views, and how far do we want to drill down to influence the grassroots level without revealing who they are or directing anything at them in the wrong way? Know why you're doing it. So any questions that you put in ultimately will require an action.
So if you're asking someone how they're feeling, do you have the right support structure to help them off the back of that if you don't? If you're looking at learning and development, being prepared to invest in that if it's a poor result that comes back. Making sure you have senior leadership buy-in, as Mairi is saying there, it needs to be at the top table, otherwise you're not going to get budget sign off to make any change. And it's not just about budget. A lot of this stuff can be free. You're already doing it. It's about spending the time and making that change comes through.
And just to interrupt there, the role modelling by senior leaders, the role modelling is so important. They have to talk it up, they have to live it, they have to absolutely, support it 100%.
I love that. And I think the role model is also important at every stage of that business, and it's sitting that senior leadership staff and breaking it down to your line manager and really bringing everybody on this journey that a survey or question shouldn't be scary. It's not designed to catch anybody out. It's about keeping everybody on that boat, on that rocket ship, going in the same direction. And if there's any bits that are being fixed or are missing, that they can get put in place by the right people that can do something with that. So, Mairi, thank you so much for your time today. For anybody else that would like to have any further questions for Mairi, I'm sure if you can put them through to us at hello@stribehq.com. That's hello@stribehq.com. We'll review them and pass them back to Mairi and get those answers for you. If you're just at the start of your journey and you want to look at another partner or a survey provider, we have a 14-day free trial that would allow you to very quickly and easily pulse out a set of questions or some surveys to try. So please do go to www.stribehq.com, click on the free trial and sign up and have a test of it and give us your feedback on what you're thinking. But I'm sure, as Mairi will agree, we certainly listen to the feedback. We want to support you to get more honest and interesting insights from your staff and be able to share and communicate back with your people with how you deliver. So Mairi, thank you so much again for all of your support with us. We love working with you, and I hope that the audience has been able to glean some insights, or if nothing else, validate that they're doing the same things and have the same challenges and going on the same path. So I hope you have a great weekend when it comes, and I hope all the audience have a lovely time. But thank you again, and look forward to speaking soon. Take care.
Thank you.